thank you all for coming. My name is Michael Lecker. I work at I AM ALS. I'm the Community Outreach and Organizing Lead. And my co-host or co-conspirator is Blake. Blake, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Michael said, my name is Blake, and I'm the Outreach and Inclusion Lead at I AM ALS. And I'm really glad to be here with everyone. Thanks for being here.
And with our powers combined, we are. No. I just wanted to give a quick introduction to I AM ALS for those of you who might not know. I AM ALS is a patient-centric movement revolutionizing how to end disease. We're a nonprofit that provides critical support and resources to people with ALS, their caregivers, and loved ones. And we're also empowering advocates to raise awareness and lead the movement against ALS in driving the development of treatments and cures. We were founded in 2019 by husband and wife team, Brian Wallach and Sandra Abreva. It was born out of the desire to rewrite the ALS story for Brian and tens of thousands of other people with ALS. To learn more about I AM ALS, you could always go to iamals.org or shoot me or Blake an email. Our emails are easy to figure out. It's michael@iamals.org and blake@iamals.org. So you were at an Ask Me Anything ALS. So I just kind of want to explain to you what this is. So this was organized by Shelly. Shelly came to me and was like, hey, I want to put on an Ask Me Anything surrounding tracheostomies. So we said, great. Who do you want to get together? And she brought together this wonderful crew. They're going to share a little bit of their story, and then we're going to open it up to questions, and then they will answer it to the best of their abilities. We also have here members from community support, our community support team, who provides support to the ALS community, helping them find resources and also being voice, lend a voice, there we go, I messed that up completely. Okay, anyway, well, they provide a listening ear, there we go, and comfort. So how are we going to interact today? We're going to be interacting in a lot of ways. If you can vocalize a question, feel free to. If you can vocalize and just prefer to use chat, you can use the chat feature. We will be reading questions in there and the answers when they come up. If you have a question, you could always raise your hand, which is a feature in reactions. You can also say in chat, I have a question, and we'll just keep track of who has questions. If you could please also mute yourself when you're not speaking, that would be great. We are going to be recording this event, and if when we post it, we are going to check in with the people who've been speaking in order to make sure that they are okay with this going online. So we'll be keeping track of who's asking questions. We also did get some pre-submitted questions, and we're going to sprinkle those in throughout the Ask Me Anything ALS event today. The other thing that I want to raise up is if you have a question later on, if you had a question, didn't get the chance to ask it, you can email gethelp@iamals.org. And you'll be connected to our community support team who provides resources, information, and lends an ear. Okay, if links get posted in the chat, you do not have to worry about clicking on all those links. We are going to send out an email to everybody in this invite with all of the links, so no need to keep track of all of those. And I believe that is it until passing it off to Hope. Blake, did I miss anything? Nope. Okay. Thank you, Blake. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Hope.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hope Fueling. I'm a social worker and a community navigator with I AM ALS. I'm joined today by my navigation colleagues, Allie and Oddity. The navigation team works to support individuals impacted by ALS with their emotional and practical needs. This includes providing and facilitating access to information involving understanding ALS and care options, clinical trials, insurance and legal assistance, assistive devices and equipment needs, amongst other services. If you have any ALS-related needs that we cannot directly assist you with, we do our best to connect you with the organization or person that can. I know that ALS can feel overwhelming to navigate and talk about at times, especially the larger decisions and planning that comes along with it. So I'm here today to provide emotional support and resources as our wonderful panel members discuss tracheostomies. Please know that anyone joining this call can reach out to me privately at any time using the Zoom chat feature. And myself and the rest of the navigation team can be reached at gethelp@iamals.org at any time if you would like to receive one-on-one support from a navigator. Thank you.
Thanks, Hope. All right. So as Michael shared, the format for today, we'll have our 6 panelists sharing about their tracheostomy experience, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience and also the pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists so we can get to the discussion portion. Thank you, Michael, for letting people in. So we'll start with Gil. Gil Garcia is a veteran of the U.S. Navy and was diagnosed with ALS in November of 2015. He lives in Floresville, Texas, with his wife of 23 years, Egma. He is also the father of 3 adult children, and he is the founder and co-lead of the I AM ALS Veterans team and spends most of his time as an ALS advocate. Chanel Hobbs is next. Chanel lives in Chester, Virginia with her husband Lamont, and they have 2 young adult daughters. At age 39, in June of 2008, Chanel was diagnosed with ALS. Chanel still works full-time as a deputy comptroller for the State Corporation Commission and is an ALS advocate. Kevin Swan could not be here today, but he did send in some answers to some of the pre-submitted questions, so we still want to make sure we're introducing him. Kevin is he founded a Life Story Foundation 6 weeks after his diagnosis and raised nearly $2 million for research and awareness. Kevin is a professional writer and marketing strategist and dad of Elliot Monroe Swan. Steve Ziegler is a native of Florissant, Missouri, where he lives with his wife, Lynn, and his 10-year-old son, Lucas. He was diagnosed with ALS in 2015, and a year and a half later was a quadriplegic and became dependent on non-invasive ventilation 24/7. This past November, after 5.5 years on non-invasive ventilation, he transitioned to invasive ventilation. He still is working with using his eye gaze as a computer programmer and spends his free time attending his son's many sporting events. He also participates in a variety of ALS organizations' awareness and advocacy efforts. Next up is Mary Saxena. Mary is a 37-year-old New Yorker who first started experiencing symptoms 6 years ago. Despite no known family history, she discovered that she carried mutations in the SOD1 and SETX genes, both associated with ALS. Her lower limb onset allowed Mary to continue her career as a public servant until she finally had to leave her job as a campaign auditor in 2018. As her upper limbs and respiratory system became affected. Today, Mary is quadriplegic, requires a feeding tube, is on a ventilator, and is trached, but that does not stop her from doing life and advocating for the ALS community. Next is Shelley Hoover, also known as the Queen of Persistent in this group, or Persistence. Shelley is a Navy veteran and has been living with ALS for 9 years. She volunteers on the I AM ALS Veterans and Legislative Community teams. She is a retired public school administrator and author, a grandma of 5, and in her 2nd year of law school, and she lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then finally is Garrett Smith. Garrett is a Navy veteran of 13 years and was deployed to Iraq in 2007 and Afghanistan in 2012. He was diagnosed with ALS in June of 2017 and has been advocating for veterans ever since. He is a member of the I AM ALS Veterans team. And those are our panelists. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive into each person and allowing them to share their experiences. So Gil, we're going to go ahead and start with you. And I did also just want to note that we'll have a few of our panelists will be typing. So we'll just make sure we give them time throughout the event to add what it is they want in the chat. And then Michael and I will be sure to read that out. Christine's asked in the chat, is he muted? And I think Gil is just typing his response. But Gil, if you're looking for us to help unmute, please let us know. Mary in the chat says, yay, Gil. Shelley says, Navy in the house. Okay, Gil says technical difficulty. Gil, is it okay if we move to Chanel while you type out your response? All right, awesome. Chanel, are you ready?
Hey.
Can you hear her?
Yes, Chanel, we can hear you and are ready for you to share on your trach experience when you have about 4 to 5 minutes.
I was diagnosed with ILS in June 2008. It started with tripping, drop foot and falling. It eventually progressed. I don't remember my FVC scores, but they declined also. The ILS clinic recommended using the BiPAP at night. I attempted to use it, but it prevented me from communicating. I could still talk, somewhat. I started using it in the evenings, after work, and before bedtime. At this point, in 2012, I was wheelchair bound, could only use left hand, had feeding tube but was physically going into the workplace every day. I didn't think of the danger I was in, LOL. As far as my breathing, it felt fine to me, even though FVC numbers declined slightly with each visit. The trach had not been suggested yet, thus, I assumed I was okay. Not only had it not been discussed with the neurologist, but my husband and I hadn't discussed it either. I was in my 4th year with ILS and knew the statistics of 2 to 5 years. I don't know if I was in denial, naive, or thought I would not follow the norm, but I didn't think decisions had to be discussed yet. However, I had thought about what I would want if I ever got to the point of needing trach and vent. I decided, in my mind, no, I didn't want that. I had seen the pals in the clinic with trachs and vents, and it was downright scary looking to me. Just a reminder, this was all in my head, never discussed with anyone. I went to work on that Friday, as usual. On Saturday, my girls and I went with my mom to an aquarium, 90 miles away. Returned home, and later that night, my husband was transferring me. I immediately felt like I couldn't breathe and recall him looking at me and asking if he needed to call 911. I said, yes, and fell unconscious. When I woke up, I was on the vent, through mouth. My husband explained that carbon dioxide had built up because my muscles were not strong enough to function normally. I had coded while getting scanned and was put on the vent. Unfortunately, my medical staff was unfamiliar with ILS and said they were going to wean me off of the vent. Based on the numbers, they didn't think I needed it. The day they pulled the tube out, they said, "Now cough." Oh boy, I had lost the ability to cough over a year ago. My husband is frantically saying I have no ability to cough. I go unconscious, again, and tube gets reinserted. I transfer to a different hospital, and it's determined I must have the trach and vent. Oh, during the transport ride, the vent loses power and paramedics had to bag me for 15 minutes. Lessons from my story: discuss your options with your family and doctors. If you decide on a trach, try to have it as a planned procedure. If an emergency procedure, try to go to a hospital with ILS knowledgeable staff. And lastly, do what you're doing now. Become knowledgeable yourself so that you can advocate for your needs and ask questions. I have no regrets regarding getting a trach and vent. I'm happy to be one of the so-called heavily equipped pals. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing that, Chanel. I can imagine that was incredibly frustrating and scary when your medical staff was unfamiliar with how to care for you while you were at the hospital. And in the chat, Q Glamcher says, thank you for sharing. And I appreciate the valuable lessons that you shared too. I think those could be transferred across many people's experiences as well. So next we're going to move to Steve. And Steve, I see you're unmuted and we are ready when you are.
As was mentioned earlier, I had been able to successfully utilize non-invasive ventilation for around 5.5 years. During that time, I had one instance of aspiration pneumonia, where I was in the hospital for a few days and then released. In November of last year, we were on our way home from an out-of-state hockey tournament, and I was having trouble swallowing secretions. Some of it went into my lungs. We tried using the cough assist but were unable to get the secretions out of my lungs. We got home and I went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up having a hard time breathing. We tried the cough assist again with not much success. My oxygen level was dropping and I passed out. My wife called 911. I was intubated and taken to the hospital. I recovered in the hospital for about 4 days. We made the decision to try to take out the intubation and go back on the non-invasive ventilation. We were successful in going back on the non-invasive ventilation initially. However, later on in the day, the nurses were turning me and I aspirated again. We tried more cough assist to get it out but were unsuccessful. At that point we knew that a decision had to be made. We either keep trying non-invasive ventilation, knowing that I could aspirate at any time and go back into respiratory failure, or get the tracheostomy. We opted for the latter. The next day, I had a percutaneous tracheostomy procedure. I spent the next week recovering from the procedure and then they did the first trach change. After that, I spent another week in the hospital while my wife learned how to care for the trach and performed a trach change to prove that she could do it. After 3 weeks in the hospital, I was able to go home. Since then, things have gone well. It took some time to relearn how to do certain things with the trach, like transfers, but we figured it out. I am more comfortable now with the trach because I have a secure airway and we have ways to effectively clear the lungs when secretions get down there. Although we don't get out as much as we used to, we still get out a couple of times a week.
Thank you, Steve. All right, next we have Mary. And I will share in the chat as well. Carrie says, thanks, Chanel. Katrina says, powerful panel, so many courageous panelists. I found my bow at you. And Lori says, thank you, Steve.
I got my trach about 1.5 years ago. It was planned, but I was not emotionally ready for it. I went into depression for a few months before learning how to live with it. Now I am glad I got the trach. It makes it easier to breathe and clear my lungs. It takes a lot of people to maintain the trach, but it is worth it.
Okay, thank you, Mayuri. Next, we're going to move to Shelley. Shelley, if you'd like to share your story with us.
Hello, everyone. I have a little bit different story. I knew I wanted to get a trach. And when my FVC started to decline rapidly, I wanted to have the procedure before I got into a crisis situation. Plus, I hate the mask. I really, really hate the mask. And I found it so uncomfortable. I couldn't wait to get rid of it. My pulmonologist was worried that with a full mask on, if I ever vomited, I would die because my arms don't work and I couldn't remove the mask by myself. And then I was afraid at some point I wouldn't wake up in the morning. So I thought we might as well do it. I had the procedure done last November. I'm still able to talk with a passenger valve on. I don't always have it on, only to take meds orally or on special occasions. If I want to eat some pie or cheesecake. But other than that, I don't wear the valve. I'm comforted in knowing I won't aspirate with a drink, cough filled with air, and I breathe much better without it. I do want to say one thing to the amazing folks who are here listening tonight. I'm a firm believer that there is no one way or one right way to live or die with ALS. And if you want to get a drink, that's great. And if you don't, that is okay too. That we're all on this journey, and it's all different for each one of us. So I applaud you for learning more, but I don't want you to feel pressure from the community that somehow you're weak if you don't. It's not for everyone, and that is okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you for those words, and thank you for putting this together. I'll just read. OCL says, "You rock, Shelley." Thank you, Stephen Shelley, is what Q Glimsher says. And there are some questions that we're going to get to. So we're going to, just to let the panelists know and to let everybody know, we're going to do every other. We're going to start with a pre-submitted question, and then we're going to shift to a question that was just asked. But before we do that, we are going to get, oh, sorry, I see Juan's message. Thank each and every one of you. You give me the courage to consider this when the time comes. This continues to be the most anxiety-inducing aspect of my journey. Love you all too. I'm guessing Chingos. And then next, last but not least, Garrett Smith.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. My breathing started to decline in 2019, and by January 2020, I ended up getting my trachea. It's been over a year, and I am still able to breathe on my own. I wear a HME filter, which is called a humidity moisturizer exchanger. I go on my ventilator at night, which definitely gives me a break. I had aspiration pneumonia a few times before getting my trachea. Sadly, my poor wife can't emotionally handle me having a trachea, so I've been living in a hospital since receiving it. I am glad to have gotten my trachea as it helps me breathe, and I know that I will live longer to see my family and watch my kids grow. It's a tough decision for many people, and I hope and pray for all of us. Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks, Garrett. And Gil is ready. So Gil, I'll pass it over to you now.
I'm considered a newly trach person, I just passed 1 year of having my new jewelry. My procedure was completely planned. I knew that I wanted it so long as I was still functioning at a level that was suitable to me. It was a scary step for sure, but I have no regrets at all. I continue to live a full life, and I truly believe that I would not be here today without it.
Thank you, Gil. All right, and with that, we are going to move to the questions. As Michael shared, we'll do pre-scripted or pre-submitted, and then some of the ones that are shared in the chat, and we're doing our best to keep up with everything that is coming through in terms of questions for panelists. Our first question, and this one is for Gil and Mayuri, but I encourage others to chime in if they wish. What do you wish you had known before surgery about life with a tracheostomy? And Gil, I'll pass it to you first.
One. This is a great question and a big part of why we are here today, right? So, I wish someone would have educated me and my wife on anxiety and panic attacks. Each of us responds differently to this procedure and new way of life. Anxiety is common post-Trach. I had never experienced anxiety before this, and I can tell you that it was a smack in the face for us. I started having panic attacks almost immediately after the procedure. I had no idea what was going on, and I literally thought I was dying. This went on for several weeks until my medical team and I started to pin it down and started a regimen of anti-anxiety medications. Things have gotten so much better, and I have become more cognizant of the symptoms. We know how to respond now, and the panic attacks are now few and far between, and I am mentally prepared to deal with them.
Thanks. Thank you, Gil. And Mayuri, and then I'll get to the chat when Mayuri is done sharing.
I would say the one important thing I wish I knew before my tracheostomy was that equally, if not more so than a physical challenge, it is a mental challenge to get used to trach life. You must train your mind as you adapt to a new lifestyle while still adapting to the other challenges that the disease will present to you. Questions of self-worth may come up, and you may be faced with some existential questions. For me, I initially questioned, who am I if I depend on a machine and trach in order to survive? Be ready to have a strong mind as you embark on this new journey.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say we're taking notes vigorously over here, as I think a lot of this will be good information to share, not just with people who've registered, but people outside of the event as well. So in the chat, let's see, Q Glimcher says, thank you, Garrett and Gil, for sharing. Carrie asked a question, which we'll get to. We've got that slotted in. Christy says, I'm a CALS, a caregiver for someone living with ALS. What are the steps leading up? And a few other questions, if we've put in our list of questions as well. Carrie says, thanks, Gil and Garrett. Shelley says, Melinda, I believe each hospice program has its own policies. You may want to inquire with your local program. Mary says, I had anxiety too. And Shelley says, I used Xanax for several weeks to deal with post-surgery anxiety. So I will move to one of the questions that came in the chat. Hopefully I can pronounce this right. The question was, what does percutaneous tracheostomy mean? And immediately in the chat, we got one answer from Steve. He said, I'll answer the percutaneous tracheostomy question later in the pre-submitted questions. Steve, would you like to go now, or do you need some time to gather your response? And Garrett says, taking an anxiety med definitely has helped me. Steve, I think what we can do is come back to it. We'll move to the next question and we'll slot this question in right after the next one so you have some time. So Michael, I'll pass it over to you for the next question.
Sounds good. And the next question is for Kevin and Shelley. And Kevin couldn't be here, but he answered those questions beforehand. And so the question was, how do you find meaning every day living with a trach? And Kevin said, the same way that I did prior to it. Don't forget that you have ALS. It doesn't have you.
I'm not gonna lie or sugarcoat. ALS can be tough and hard, but living life without ALS can be hard as well. I found that given my physical limitations and the technology that I have access to, how can I love and encourage other people? How can I help others see their own greatness? And I have to look outside of myself. It's not about me. If I focus on myself, I get depressed. If I focus on others and how I can be of service to others, that gives me meaning. If you keep asking yourself, you'll find those answers for you. I found for myself that volunteering with I AM ALS, they did pay me to say this, but it has given me a purpose and a hope because I'm part of something bigger than myself, and it gives my days meaning. So you can find purpose or not, with or without a trach.
Thank you, Shelley. The next question we have is from the chat, and it was, when you say it takes a lot of people to clean or maintain the trach, can you be more specific? So anybody who would like to take this, let me know. I'll give a second for people to either nod or in the chat state that they'll answer. Mary just informed us that they typed a response above, and so I'll read it. I need someone 24/7 to be with me, so I have a team of nurses and my mom who work around the clock in case I need suction, trach suction, or cough assist. And Garrett said, I probably decided to get my trachea at an early stage so I could have wore a CPAP for a while longer, but I am glad I chose to get mine at an earlier stage. If I remember, my breathing score was down to 30, and having bulbar ALS really affected breathing through my nose. And I'll read some more of the chat. Melinda said my FVC is now 45%. And Melinda said, true, I am Intoverson intrathecal injection open labels still monthly. It gives me purpose to know my data will help future generations. Juan said, my ALS family, all of you are badasses. Katrina said, this response is gold, Shelley. And Carrie said, we appreciate all you do, Shelley. And Claire said, I'll second the question above if it wasn't answered already. Well, I couldn't hear, sorry. All about what breathing score FVC were folks at when trach became necessary. And Shelley said my FVC was 28%. And Melinda said, gratitude for all of you.
All right. Steve, I just wanted to check in with you to see if you're ready to answer the question about what percutaneous tracheostomy means. Great, not yet. So we'll move on to question 5. And the question was, at what point is a tracheostomy recommended, or was it recommended for you? And our first answer came from Kevin, who submitted his answer. And he said, when I went into respiratory failure and died on the way to the hospital. And we also have, Steve, we have you as having an answer prepared for this question. So I'll pass it over to you. And if you're not ready, that's totally fine. Just let us know, but I'll give you some time.
There are definitely varying opinions on this topic. Through my own experience, through anecdotal evidence from the experiences of other pals, and talking with my pulmonologist, I have determined that there are 3 things to look for. The first thing is low functioning diaphragm. This typically presents itself as shortness of breath when doing low levels of physical activity. One example would be walking out to the car. One hallmark of the beginning of diaphragm weakness is being very tired during the day. This is caused by the body waking up frequently during the night, even though you might not realize it, to increase your respiration rate. Your body never gets into a deep sleep, which makes you tired during the day. Your breathing function can be tested using the forced vital capacity test. There really is no magic number at which you need to get a trach, but typically if you are under 50%, some sort of breathing support is recommended. That could be non-invasive ventilation just when sleeping, which is usually the first step, non-invasive some during the day and at night, etc. The second thing which would indicate that a trach would be needed is if there is quite a bit of diaphragm weakness and non-invasive ventilation is not tolerated. Some people tolerate non-invasive ventilation very well and can use it for a long period of time, as I did. Others just can't tolerate its use. If breathing support is necessary but non-invasive ventilation is not tolerated, then the only option to sustain life is the tracheostomy. The third thing to look out for is the ability to protect the airway from secretions or other fluids from getting into the lungs. Aspiration can actually happen three ways. One is through secretions, saliva, and/or mucus, gets into the lungs. The second is by food and/or drink getting into the lungs. The third is from reflux from the stomach making its way back up to the throat and getting into the lungs. All of these are caused by weakness of the muscles in the throat and tongue. These muscles are no longer able to guide the food back to the esophagus, or they are unable to protect the trachea. This would indicate that a tracheostomy. This could manifest itself as multiple instances of pneumonia. Long story short, if you need respiratory support and because of a weakened diaphragm, if you can tolerate non-invasive ventilation and you can protect your airway, you can use non-invasive ventilation as long as those two things remain true. If you can't tolerate non-invasive ventilation or you can't protect your airway, then you will need to get the tracheostomy to sustain life. I would always encourage you to talk with your doctor. It is better to get a planned tracheostomy rather than wait until it is an emergency.
Thanks, Steve. That was extremely helpful for me, at least. So definitely appreciate that. I'm going to go to the chat and read out some of other people's responses. Gil says I was at 10%, if I remember correctly, and I still could breathe a little on my own. Mary says my doctor recommended it early, but I held off as much as I could. And she also said I had a nasal mask for a year first. Juan says, thank you all, I have to sign off. Shelly says, I have a day nurse Monday through Friday, so my husband could go back to work and golf occasionally, and my family cares for me the remainder of the time. We use a baby monitor so the family can see if I need suction. And Owen says, it sounded like half or more of the panelists served in the military. Does that help pay for 24/7 nursing, and are all panelists in the US? And we will slot that question in and give people some time to answer it, Owen. Our next question was a pre-submitted one, and the question is for Shelly. How many, or other panelists as well, how many of you had lung infections and breathing function issues like I did? And for how long before your doctor said that something needed to be done?
I never had an infection. I'm actually very healthy, except for these stupid motor neurons. But as I said earlier, my pulmonologist really wanted or encouraged me to get it earlier rather than later. There was a chat question I could answer quickly, but I forgot what it was.
Let's see, could it have been, when you say it takes a lot of people to clean or maintain your trach, can you be more specific?
Just my husband or nurse changes my inner cannula once a day and cleans with sterile Q-tips around the stoma, but that just takes a few minutes.
Thank you, Shelley. And I'm going to read the chat. Chrissy said, Steve, if the reason is number 3, what does the trach do? Can you still breathe on your own? And I will put that in the list, Steve, so you'll have some time to think about that.
I remember the question now. It was, what determines if you can't eat or speak with a trach? And I could actually speak better after my trach because I have enough air where I couldn't speak loud enough to be heard. I'll be able to talk as long as my tongue and mouth allow me to. And the same with swallowing. I get most of my nutrition from a bag, but I like to eat occasionally, and I am still able to swallow.
Thank you for answering that, Shelley. Did any of the other panelists want to answer that question? Give a pause. I'm going to read from the chat. Garrett said, Steve, you said it best. Definitely don't wait until you desperately need to breathe. Gil said, you can have a swallow test to see if it's safe to continue eating. I can still eat some. Maori said, personally, I had already lost my voice and had a feeding tube by the time I got the trach. Gil said, I didn't have any infections prior to trach. Garrett said, I had gotten COVID back in January, and thank goodness it was only mild symptoms. Chanel said, I had never had either lung infections. Christine said, my pulmonologist told me not to get a trach because it would create a financial and emotional burden for my family. Has anyone else experienced this? Gil said, I needed suction as we speak. I would be happy to demonstrate. I am needing suction as we speak. I would be happy to demonstrate. Sorry, Gil, I messed that up for you. Sunny said, at Christine, what the actual F-bomb? And then Sunny said, show us at Gil, show us. And Mary said, answer above, laughing out loud. And then trach, not take. I said, Christine. Shelley said, Christine, that is up to you and your family. Garrett said, if you can still breathe on your own and decide to get a trach at an early stage, then you can wear a HME filter over your trach and still breathe on your own. Blake said, for panelists, next question comes from the chat. My concern is, would a tracheostomy curb hospice? Melinda said, thank you. I am getting my PEG this Friday. And Maori said in answer to that question, it is a concern. I'll give a moment in case any other panelists want to chime in on that question. Oh, sorry, that is in response to Christine. Christine. Melinda said, I am taking all in for my decisions. What we'll do is we'll save the chat at the end of this and then follow up with people just to make sure that their answers were fully questioned. The next question is for Steve.
Michael, we did have an answer actually from a participant for that question. I'll go ahead and read it out. We have two.
Thank you.
Yeah. Claire says, we just learned that our PALS qualifies for extended hospice here in Oregon, where he can still be pursuing life-extending treatments, but receive all the supports and care of hospice. And Hope from our navigation team shared, having a trach shouldn't be an obstacle for you to receive hospice, but you likely cannot get a trach after you start hospice because it's considered a life-extending treatment. And Gil says, let me demonstrate suction right now. Shelley says, suction doesn't hurt, by the way. Gil says, I'm using cough assist as well. That was it. Vienna says, what does it feel like? And I think if panelists want to answer that question, we'll give them some time and to type out any answers. And then Michael, you ready to move to 9?
Yep.
And really quick in the chat, going back to the hospice question, Hope says, however, as Shelley mentioned, please check in with your local hospices about their policies. We have another question, which Teresa will slot in as we continue to get through some of these questions. And then really quick before we move on, Sandra says, I cannot thank you enough for hosting this. The panelists have given such good and practical information. I already had a consult with an ENT and this decision is getting closer for me. The advice to schedule the procedure and not wait for a crisis is timely. Sandra, we're glad you're here.
And Brett asked the question, what specifically is the reason for not being able to be left alone after getting a trach? I will copy that and put it into our document to answer. We're going to slide it in later.
All right, so our next question was for you, Steve, and the question was, how invasive is the procedure? And I also want to remind panelists or anyone who's here that that question can be answered by you as well.
There are actually two types of tracheostomy procedures. One is surgical, which is the typical procedure, and a newer procedure which is percutaneous. The surgical procedure makes an incision where the trach will go. Then they will insert the trach through the incision. It is a pretty simple procedure and really isn't very invasive. Probably the most invasive part of it is that they require you, in most cases, to be intubated before the procedure. But you are typically under anesthesia before they intubate you. The second procedure is called a percutaneous tracheostomy. This procedure is performed by poking a small hole where the trach will go and then dilating the hole to the right size for the trach. Then the trach is inserted into the hole. This procedure is less invasive than the surgical procedure because no cutting is involved and can actually be performed bedside instead of in an operating room. You still need to be intubated before the procedure. Neither procedure is very invasive.
Thank you for that, Steve. I'm going to read a little bit from the chat. Carrie said, I am also curious if the VA help with 24/7 care. Q Glimcher says, do most insurance companies cover assisted care? Maori says, we'll put that question into the chat. Q. Maori said, for me, I need to suction fluids out of lungs or I will choke. Sandra said, were you under general anesthesia for the procedure? Lori said, thank you for all the useful info. A lot to think about. You are all amazing. Shelley said, Brett, if you can use your hands, if you can't use your hands, you need suction assistance. Maori said, I have Medicaid covering 24/7 care. Shelley said, I was out for the surgery. Garrett said, you can be left alone as long as you have a way to call someone. I have a call button that I can press with my head, or you can use an alarm on your computer. Maori said, I was under general anesthesia. And Carrie said, my insurance doesn't cover any care. And Gil said, I was completely out.
Thanks. And Hope just shared in the chat for the question regarding assisted care. Private and public insurance may help with in-home care, but there may also be out-of-pocket costs. This article might be helpful to read regarding paying for in-home care. Thanks, Hope. So our next question is for Kevin, Shelley, and Gil. And the question was, what was the most difficult experience for you during the first few weeks post-trach surgery? And Kevin shared that he was freaking out that he didn't have his mask on and how much more energy he had. He had no idea he had been working so hard to breathe. And now I'll pass it over to Shelley and Gil.
I remember coming out of anesthesia and looking at my husband and the doctor, and I was in total panic because I didn't think I was breathing. I felt no air in my mouth or nose, but that's not where the air goes. So once I calmed down, I found that I was okay. But don't hesitate to have some anti-anxiety meds on hand to get through some of the scarier times. It took about a month before I was completely comfortable. And now I don't think much about it at all, other than I breathe much better than I did before.
And I'll read a little bit from the chat while Gil prepares his answer. Chanel says, for me, it was complete shock, which is normal. I was afraid in the beginning. Gil also said in the chat, as far as being concerned about being cared for, and I think I missed, oh, Gil said it's really not that scary as far as being concerned about being cared for. Garrett says, depending on the person, you get your trach changed every 3 months, but some require every month. And I know a few that went way longer. It just depends on the person and how they heal from having it changed. Gil, I see you're unmuted. I'm just going to answer one more from the chat. If you'd like assistance, Hope says from our navigation team, if you'd like assistance exploring coverage and in-home care for options for you or a loved one, the navigation team can assist with that. The emails get help@iamals.org. Thanks, Hope. And Gil?
2. As I explained before, the anxiety was a difficult situation for me, but I also feel like the initial realization of the gravity of what life would be like from now on was immense. First, I felt like, what the heck did I just get myself into? Then it was the overwhelming sense of fragility and responsibility of keeping me alive.
And thank you, Gail. We're gonna go from a question from the chat. What are the steps leading up? What does invasive and non-invasive look like?
I can answer that. Non-invasive ventilation is using a mask like a BiPAP machine for your nose or your nose and mouth. Typically, you use it at night to give your diaphragm a rest and increase the mask usage as much as you need. Then it is considered invasive when you have a tracheostomy. That is my understanding. She may have more detail.
And Chanel said yes, Shelley. And our next question is, and I'll if other people want to answer that, let me know. And if you can put your answer in the chat, or if you want to vocalize it, just let us know. This one is for Shelley. Can a trach be removed for showering? how long do hotspots stay after the procedure?
I leave my tray on during the shower. I have a little cover that I put over it. It looks like a little miniature cape, like when you get a haircut, but it's very small. And then we just avoid direct water on the tray. I could remove the ventilator as I can still move some air on my own, but I'm much more comfortable with it on. And changing the tray, I do at home once a month, and it might sting a little bit, but it's not that big a deal. It just pops out and then new one pops in. So it sounds a lot scarier than it actually is. I liken it to putting on a pair of new underwear, and it feels good once it's in.
And in the chat, Blake put the next question, which is, Mary talked about a group of nurses 24/7. Is this the case for everyone? And then I know Shelley answered that earlier by saying that during the day, there's somebody there to assist, and then the rest of the time it's Shelley's family. Gil said, you must keep it in at all times. The hole would close. Maori said, I take sponge baths because I'm too scared. And Steve wrote, as for number 3, that someone asked earlier, the trach has a cuff, which is a balloon that inflates and blocks the secretions, food, drinks, etc., from getting into the lungs.
And that was in regards to what does a percutaneous tracheostomy mean?
And Gil said, I just have my wife right now.
And Hope shared in the chat, percutaneous dilatational tracheostomy, PDT, also referred to as bedside tracheostomy, is the placement of a tracheostomy tube without direct surgical visualization of the trach. This is considered a minimally invasive bedside procedure that may be easily performed in the intensive care unit or at the patient's bedside with continuous monitoring of the patient's vital signs. And that is a resource from Johns Hopkins, and she shared the link. She said this article may be helpful to read as well. Thank you, Hope.
Okay. The next question is for Mary. How is this different from using a mask?
Initially, when I needed the BIPIP, I wore a nasal mask for over a year. It was nice not being tethered to the machine, but I would have to constantly clean my nose, and it was somewhat dramatic not getting air for a few seconds while the mask had to come off during cleaning. I would have to also be careful of cuts on my nose due to the abrasiveness of the nasal mask. Not having a trach meant suctioning through my mouth, which was extremely uncomfortable. In fact, it was why I ended up getting a trach, because it was becoming impossible to suction through my mouth. Once I got the trach, it felt like my secretions increased, but it was so much easier to suction. Obviously, not having anything obstructing my face was liberating. Even though it was hard for me to adjust to the trach, it made my life much more easier to breathe and remove secretions.
And Garrett put in the check. Unfortunately for me, I have a very sensitive gag reflex, which causes me to cough. And Shelley just said me too.
Our next question is for Kevin and Steve. And the question is simply, how fragile is it? And Kevin did submit a question. He said an answer. He said, this is a good question and a big misconception. It is really flexible and doesn't make physical transfers any more difficult than before. I've never used a Hoyer or any other type of lift. And Steve, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I guess they were like posting it.
Surprisingly, it isn't that fragile. The most fragile part is probably the cuff for a cuffed trach. Most trachs used these days are cuffed. The cuff is a balloon on the end of the trach which goes into the trachea. This balloon is inflated to seal the airway so that air doesn't get out and secretions, or other stuff, can't get in. Since it is a balloon, it can deflate. However, this is a rare event. I have put my head all the way down on the trach. It doesn't bother the trachea but can be uncomfortable. The most fragile part of the system is probably a hose coming disconnected when being moved or transferred. That isn't a big deal. Someone just has to reconnect the hose. It is more of an annoyance to the caregiver than anything. One other thing to mention. The stoma and/or muscles can hurt from time to time. This is especially true if the trach has been yanked on accidentally. Yes, it happens, or you recently had a trach change. This will typically go away in a few days. So, all in all, it really isn't that fragile.
Thanks, Steve. And I shared the next question in the chat. It was, actually, we have an answer from Chanel, which I'll share first. My husband transfers me without a lift. We take vent off and transfer, no issues with trach, and it's not fragile. And Gil says ditto. And Garrett says, it really doesn't take many people. And this is in regards to the next question. So I'll go ahead and ask that one out loud. When you say it takes a lot of people to clean or maintain the trach, can you be more specific? And Garrett's response was, it really doesn't take many people. One person can clean or suction. When you get your trach changed, then it takes a couple people.
My nurse does all of it by herself, and including the trach change. My husband and daughter can each clean it and change my inner cannula, which is just a little piece of plastic on the inside that get changed daily. My cuff has a trach. My trach has a cuff with the air, and the air goes out of the cuff so I can speak and put the speaking valve on. And when we take the speaking valve off, we re-inflate with air.
And I'll read from the chat. OCL said, what number is your cuff pressure at? And then Maori said, we need at least 5 people to transfer me onto a stretcher and 3 people using a Hoyer. Teresa said, how does it affect your ability to travel? And I'll put that in the chat. And then I'll put that in the list of questions. Gil said, I got my trach change in outpatient procedure. Christine asks, what type of surgeon does tracheostomy surgery? ENT, general surgeon? And I'll put that into the list too. And then Chanel said, my husband does it, have been able to get to nursing care since pandemic. Oh, haven't been able to get to nursing care since pandemic. And Maori said, my mom does trach change. And Shelly said to OCL's question, 28-ish. Garrett says, I use a blue digital syringe that reads the cuff pressure. I keep mine at 30. And Shelly said, fancy, Garrett. Garrett is very fancy. And Gil said about traveling. We drove from Texas to California just a few months after getting it. OCL said, typically a head and neck surgeon does the surgery. Hope said, this is a quote, an ALS diagnosis does not have to stop you from traveling. If you want to visit friends or embark on a new adventure, plan ahead and take that trip. It may take more planning, time, and patience, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't get out and enjoy yourself. This is from your ALS guide. And if you would like to learn more about ALS and travel, this article may be helpful to you. And I'm going to copy and paste that so I can email it to you all. And then Gil said in response to that, yes, yes, yes.
We have a to-go bag, always packed, that has a spare shrink, an ambu bag, extra hose, tape, anything we might need. And we just throw it in the car. So we have it with us. And then I bring our suction machine when we leave the house as well. But it really doesn't hinder. If we're on a longer trip and I need suction, we just pull over. It's not that big of a deal.
In the chat, Steve says, my wife is my only caregiver and she does everything. My pressure in the 28 to 30 range. Christine says, Team Gleason has some great resources on traveling with event and a wheelchair and flying. Mary says, I don't travel because I constantly need cough assist and trach suctioning, and we just don't have enough staff. Chanel says, I do my cuff air by feel. Guess after 10 years on trach, I can tell the amount needed. And Gil says, I don't recommend getting bagged. It is not fun. Believe you me. Chanel says, travel all the time. Steve says, usually tracheostomies are done by an ENT. Sounds like that's the general consensus. Thank you, Steve, and others who shared that. We have our next question. Or yes, we probably should close out because it is 5:58. I think there's been some discussion about maybe doing another one of these because we've continued to add in questions. And I know there's probably more people who would love to join in the future. So Michael, I don't know if you want to chime in on that at all, but we'll probably be looking at another one with these panelists or others. And would love for people to submit more questions as well.
Yeah, I'll just let you know, we started with 16 questions. We are at now 36, which means there's a lot of interest in this. And I think in respecting our panelists' time, we're gonna let them go for the evening, and then we'll be back in touch with them to see if they are interested in a round two. No pressure, team. So we will get back to them. We will also get back to you. And so we'll be sending an email with resources, and then we will email everybody who is signed up for this event and let them know about the time of the second event. So don't worry about watching out on social media or anything. We've got you covered. In the meantime, if you have any questions about tracheostomies or really anything related to ALS, we have, as you've seen, people who are very resourceful working on I AM ALS. Hope is just one of an amazing, incredible team on our community support team. So please do reach out to them. Their email address is gethelp@iamals.org. And if you forget that, you know Michael and Blake's name. So michael@iamals.org, and we can forward whatever your questions you have to them. And I know there's so much love going on in the chat right now. So there's a lot of thank yous and a lot of admiration for you all. And I'm just really, really thankful for not only this team of panelists, but also all of you for showing up and asking these questions. And for those who's pre-submitted questions, thank you too. If you come up with more questions, feel free to either fill out that form again, or just shoot myself or Blake an email. Blake, am I missing anything?
No, I think you covered it. Lots of love to the panelists, and I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists, to our navigation team for being here, and to everyone who came to ask questions and learn. We're glad to have you as a part of this community. Yeah, and I don't know if anybody here has closing remarks from the panelists. I'll quickly read through what I can see. Steve said, "You are welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming." Gil said, "It was an honor." Garrett said, "Thank you, everyone. Take care." Mayori said, "Thank you, everyone." Gil did say this is important. Everyone is different, so you have to do what you are comfortable with. Thank you, Gil. Those are wise words. Okay, I think that's it. I think I've gotten all of those, but oh, Chanel said welcome. Okay, well, you all have a glorious night. And it was great spending the evening with you, and I look forward to round two with you soon. Take care, everybody.